Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're looking at a place that, well, a lot of us probably know right now as this fresh, modern, and frankly idyllic European travel destination. But beneath all those charming streets and vibrant cafes, there lies a massive, turbulent, and absolutely unbelievable historical footprint. We're going to explore the story of Lithuania. It's a country tucked right there in northeastern Europe that has, quite literally, lived multiple lives.
Think about this for a second. How does a peripheral state survive being erased from the map entirely? And I don't just mean defeated in a war or subjugated. I mean completely wiped away, erased. It's a profound historical anomaly. What we're really looking at today is the ultimate phoenix narrative arc, the story of a nation that was totally dismantled, only to resurrect itself through pure, unfiltered cultural willpower. It's honestly a masterclass in resilience, and the mechanics at exactly how they pulled it off are fascinating. Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be hitting 1. The Grand Duchy's Golden Age. 2. Erasure and First Awakening. 3. World Wars and Soviet rule. 4. The Singing Revolution. And 5. Modern Lithuania. Let's jump in.
Section 1. The Grand Duchy's Golden Age.
To really understand what Lithuania lost, you have to look at this jaw-dropping contrast. On the one hand, you have modern Lithuania, a relatively compact Baltic state. But back in the 15th century, the Grand Duchy was one of the largest states in all of Europe. It literally stretched all the way from the Baltic Sea up north, right down to the Black Sea in the south. We're talking about a massive dynasty that encompassed modern-day Belarus, Ukraine, and even parts of Russia and Poland. They controlled the key commerce routes between East and West. They were a total heavyweight, going toe-to-toe with the Swedes, the Russians, and the Teutonic Knights. And right at the very heart of this massive empire was Vilnius. But it wasn't just a capital city, it was this incredibly vibrant, multicultural melting pot. Ever since the 14th century, it was bringing together Lithuanians, Poles, Jews, and Tatars. It was a bustling, chaotic center of trade, religion, and the arts, kind of acting like a microcosm for the whole region. You had this unique urban community built on mutual tolerance, but of course, it was also a city that kept getting passed between rival empires and shifting alliances. It was truly the cultural wellspring of the era, packed with grand Baroque architecture, and eventually a world-renowned university.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Erasure and First Awakening.
So, by 1795, through a whole series of partitions, the Russian Empire, Prussia, and Austria basically carved up the territory. Lithuania was, for all intents and purposes, removed from the map. There's this saying from the time, if not God, then Swede. If not Swede, then Mescal. It's incredibly practical, and it brilliantly hits the nail on the head regarding the mindset of the locals back then. The Lithuanian people completely understood that their physical lands were constantly being fought over and dominated by these massive empires, especially the Russian Empire. But their internal identity, that remained totally unshakable.
Because, you see, the Tsarist Russian suppression wasn't just about military occupation. It was a systematic, calculated cultural erasure. In 1832, they closed down Vilnius University, basically trying to pinch off the flow of local intellectual thought. Then, they completely banned the Latin-Polish alphabet for printing any Lithuanian texts and forced everyone to use a Cyrillic script called Grizdanka instead. They even went so far as to close Catholic churches or forcibly convert them to Orthodox ones. The primary targets were clear: language, education, and religion. But here's the crazy part. This extreme, heavy-handed suppression actually backfired. It sparked a massive underground book smuggling network and triggered the very first true national awakening.
Which brings us to Section 3, World Wars and Soviet rule. That resilient spirit is exactly what carried them into a brutally volatile 20th century. Lithuanians actually tasted this brief, glorious period of independence starting in 1918, but man, the geopolitical winds were about to shift violently. The whiplash here is almost hard to wrap your head around. In 1940, right after a secret pact between Hitler and Stalin, the Soviets occupied Lithuania. Just 1 year later, in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded, which brought another devastating wave of terror and the tragic decimation of Lithuania's vibrant Jewish population. And then, as the front shifted again in 1944, the Soviets reoccupied the territory. That's 3 brutal transitions of power in just 4 years. The human cost the region endured during this window is just staggering.
Just pause on this number for a second. 35,000. That's the approximate number of people who were caught up in the initial Soviet deportations that kicked off on a single night, June 14, 1941. In literally a matter of days, tens of thousands of lives were completely uprooted.
And you really have to ask, who exactly were they targeting? Well, it was teachers, landowners, priests, journalists, civil servants,
The Soviets were specifically going after the cultural, intellectual, and administrative backbone of the entire nation. These folks were dragged from their beds in the dead of night, packed tightly into cattle wagons, and shipped off to the freezing wilderness of Siberia. It was a cold, calculated attempt to basically behead the nation's identity so it wouldn't even be able to resist assimilation.
But as shocking as that first wave was, this next number reveals the true scale of the tragedy: 300,000. In just a tiny 3-year span following the Soviet reoccupation in 1944, over 300,000 Lithuanians were expelled to Siberian labor camps. To put that into perspective, that is an absolute demographic wound for a small nation.
Yet despite all of this unimaginable terror, the people didn't just roll over and yield. Around 200,000 armed partisans, who became locally known as the Forest Brothers, mounted this fierce, hidden resistance straight from the dense Lithuanian woods. This was the Forest War. For years and years after World War II ended for the rest of the globe, these partisans were out there fighting a desperate, underground battle against the mighty Soviet regime. They were doing whatever it took to keep the dream of a free Lithuania alive.
Section 4. The Singing Revolution.
Over time, the weapons of survival started to shift. They moved from rifles hidden in the forests to the absolute, undeniable power of culture. And this grassroots resistance systematically dismantled Soviet authority piece by piece. Step 1, they never, ever stopped smuggling underground religious and cultural texts, constantly preserving their true history. Step 2, fast forward to the 1980s, they leveraged Gorbachev's policies of glasnost, and the San-Judas reform movement rose up, loudly demanding change. And then, step 3, they used mass prayer vigils and nationwide choirs. The very things the oppressors tried to ban centuries earlier, the Lithuanian language and music literally became their shield. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered together just to sing banned national songs, staring down Soviet tanks with absolutely nothing but their voices.
And that leads us to our final chapter. Section 5. Modern Lithuania.
On March 11, 1990, Lithuania stepped right up and boldly became the very first Soviet republic to declare the restoration of its independence. And despite some early economic struggles and all the growing pains of a massive transition, they moved incredibly fast. By May 1, 2004, they had officially joined the European Union, and by 2009, that historic melting pot we talked about earlier, Vilnius, it was named the European Capital of Culture. They transitioned from a suppressed Soviet territory to a thriving, democratic, modern European state in what feels like the blink of a historical eye. So it leaves us with this really huge question. Can the preservation of a simple language and a song really outlast the absolute might of empires and tanks? Well, the history of Lithuania tells us unequivocally, yes. The story of this Phoenix nation is such a powerful reminder of the ultimate strength of cultural memory and human resilience. I really hope this explainer gave you a fresh, powerful perspective on a truly remarkable part of the world. Thanks for joining me today.